Hi all. So I'm going to give you some guidance now in relation to your evidence of reflection. Now, if you remember when I was in Yangon last, I was trying to encourage you to use a reflective diary or a reflective log every time you did a piece of work in relation to the program to assist you. This was mainly to assist you so that when you got to this point, you didn't have to try and remember things that you did in July, in August, in September, in October, but that you had a written reflection of the things and the ideas that you were coming up with at that time. So I hope you were all keeping your reflective diaries. Nonetheless, I'm not going to test you. Or maybe I should test you. Should I test you? No, I won't do that. You're all adults. Well, some of you. Anyway, moving on. So your evidence of reflection, I keep looking down because I've got this with me, and I'll keep looking down because I've got my notes on the screen in front of me. So your evidence of reflection, it's really important to remember that this is based on the two taught sequential lessons and your experiences during the module. So what happened in those two lessons and all the work you did in relation to those two lessons, such as the lesson planning, the feedback from the students, the evaluations and so forth, they should feature quite prominently in your written work. So the first point here is asking for an analysis of the approaches to teaching and learning that you used in the two observed lessons. They're asking you, they're sort of telling you that your analysis should identify what engaged and motivated your learners to learn, but also to explain the reasons why. So it's important not to be descriptive of what happens. What you're looking at is you're thinking about the design processes, what your rationale was for doing the certain activity or using a certain approach or the strategy you used, and then the impact of that. And I think it's really important, and the most obvious way of knowing if your lesson was effective is whether the students achieved the learning outcomes. And because these are two sequential lessons, your second lesson, at the beginning of your second lesson, you would have done some eliciting to recall the first lesson, and this again would give you information about how effective that lesson was. So bear that in mind. Okay. So that's the analysis. Now, the analysis is also in relation to criterion 3. Okay. Your evidence of reflection, all candidates' accounts of analysis and evaluation. This is guidance directly from the program leader book. All of your accounts of analysis and evaluation must be informed or supported by different information sources drawn from relevant and topical studies, inquiries and experience. Now, at the end of your assignment on the template, it will say that it will ask you for a minimum of 3 sources. Please do not only provide 3 sources of evidence. Okay. I would expect there to be a minimum of about 10 different sources, and not just websites. Okay, yes, we can get loads of information from the internet, but please, not just websites. Websites, books, journals, observations of practice, feedback from your observer, feedback from me, feedback from your peers. Okay, reflecting on your reflective diary. Lots of places to get that information. So the analysis, that's the analysis. And then secondly, you must also provide an evaluation. So remember, the evaluation is to determine what value did your lessons have, okay? How was it beneficial? Or not just the lesson, but evaluate your practice, your approach, okay? Don't just describe, again, what happened in your lesson, but make sure that you evaluate it, you find out the value. And to make this really clear, you can say, you know, make that clear on evaluating my lesson, or when evaluating my lesson. Yeah, it's a good starting point to a sentence. So an evaluation of the 2 lessons, highlighting what worked well and why. Please don't forget to tell us why you think it worked well. We also need you to tell us what didn't work well, and tell us why you think it didn't work well, or why it didn't work. Okay, now remember, these are your reflections. You can only go on what happened within that lesson. In addition to this, you must also tell us what you intend to do in the future to improve this. Okay, so for example, you might have done a new learning activity or a new formative assessment activity, and perhaps it didn't work because you weren't able to give instantaneous feedback, or it was too difficult to formatively assess all students, or your formative assessment wasn't as effective because you weren't able to get data that you could use. Maybe that's something that didn't work well. What are you going to do about it? Okay, so then you might respond and say, in future, I will tweak that formative assessment activity because the students enjoyed it, but I will ask more action or active questions to the students to gain more qualitative feedback from them. Okay, you've got to tell us what you're going to do to fix it in future. All right, don't waffle on, stay focused. Okay, next, an evaluation of the learning activity and the formative assessment activity that you designed and used that was new to your practice. Now, I know that for some of you, it might have been a little bit difficult to try and create a new learning activity or a new formative assessment activity, because pretty much I guess everything will have been done already in the world. Okay, but I think what might be helpful for you to sort of understand is when you've created your new activity, you might have actually used that activity in the past, okay, but on this particular occasion, it may be that you have designed the activity but included differentiation by task, so that the differentiated task was so that low, middle and ability learners could work together and learn together. Previously, you might have done that activity and it hasn't, you've had to do something quite different for the lower ability and something quite different for the higher ability. So although that activity could have been used previously, it would be clearly new to your practice if you have differentiated it for them to work together. Okay? Alternatively, you might have very deliberately grouped some students together so that there's some peer learning through mixed ability. So those with higher ability get the opportunity to teach lower, further consolidating their new knowledge, and the lower ability students are gaining that peer learning interaction of being taught in a context that they would understand. So the activity itself might not be completely new, but how it's been designed and the purpose and the way that you're using it might be the new practice. Okay. It might be that your activity in the past, you hadn't really considered it to be constructive in design, and now it is, and you've kind of tweaked the different elements of it to make it more meaningful, and so forth. Okay. And again, when you're sort of talking about what worked well and why, being a very new activity, being formative assessment or learning activity, it might not have actually worked. And in some respects, I think Cambridge International Education are expecting it not to work because you're using it for the first time. So it's really important to really analyse the different elements of the activity that you delivered, and not just observing what's taking place, but the things that you can't see in terms of learning processes and outcomes, because these things aren't always tangible. When you're thinking about why it didn't work, again, you've got to get a little bit deeper, and not because, you know, say superficial things like the students didn't engage because they didn't like the activity, or, you know, something unacceptable like that. I've got an example here, and I'm going to read it straight off of the guidance. So, after reflecting on the experience and possibly analysing observer and feedback and learner feedback, you might conclude that the reasons why an activity did not work as expected was due to, say, poor management of the group. In terms of your group selection, it could be the size of the groups were too big. It could be that as a teacher you were focusing on scaffolding for the low ability learners, and therefore it lacked challenge for higher ability learners. So can you see how we're kind of getting to the nitty gritty? But remember, stay focused. The final objective here is an evaluation of your teaching practice and the learner's learning, using feedback from a variety of sources to identify existing strengths and those aspects that need further development. So it's really important here now to sort of to link the information that your observer has given you on your feedback form. That's what you need to be focusing on, that information they gave you. The feedback from your learners, because you had to do an evaluation, remember, and you had to summarize it. That information, okay, when the CIE assessor reads that, what you've written in your evidence of reflection, they need to be able to see that it corresponds directly with what has been written. It corresponds directly with the evidence that you're producing, okay? Make sure it links together. There could be some feedback from elsewhere, but it's not in the evidence. Don't spend all your words writing about that. They want to see it linked within the evidence of your work. So where do you get your feedback from? You've got your feedback from your mentor's observation. You've got feedback through collaborative working with your peers. So please remember to include collaborative working with your peers, okay? You've had feedback from your students, and if you haven't, why not? It is one of the activities that we did in the early days. If you haven't, please come back to me. Let's get this sorted out immediately. And me, of course. You've had feedback from me. So you've had feedback on your tasks, your individual tasks, in the form of like an assessment, and you've had feedback sort of verbally as well, in different ways, okay, like your video task. I've been given feedback on that. So it's important to tie everything together, link everything together. I'm going to send you some written guidance. And again, that's going to come directly from the Program Leader's Handbook, so that you can see quite clearly what you need to focus on. Okay, there are the 4 objectives there, and these are all in relation to your program. Okay, speak soon. Bye bye.